All right, welcome to week 3. This week we're going to be talking about how to write a thesis statement, how to outline, and paragraph development. So this week is very important as we begin the writing process. Up until now, we've been talking a lot about plagiarism and citations, but this week we're really going to focus on actually starting to write and working on this final paper for this course. So we'll begin by talking about thesis statement and how to craft a thesis statement. So formulating and developing a thesis statement. So what is a thesis statement? A thesis statement states an argument about a topic and then describes briefly how it will be proved. So really a thesis statement is pretty straightforward. It's really doing two things. It's laying out what your argument for the paper is and what main points you're going to use to develop that argument. So your thesis statement is the overarching idea that you are trying to communicate in your paper. And so it's in a sense trying to boil down your entire paper or your entire idea into one statement. So with this in mind, a thesis statement should be the main focus or guiding idea behind your paper. So every paragraph, every sentence, every piece of evidence should all be coming back to supporting your thesis statement, to proving this overall thesis. So everything should always be pointing back to this statement. Therefore, a thesis statement should really do three things. It should make an assertion that is clearly defined, focused, and supported. So it should be very straightforward and very clear what the thesis is, very well defined and focused. It should come at the beginning of your essay, so the reader knows right at the beginning of the paper, this is what the focus of this paper is. I often tell students, you don't want to keep any secrets from your reader. You're not waiting for the punchline to come at the very end of the paper like you would in a story or a piece of fiction, waiting till the end, the building of suspense. You don't want that in academic writing. You want to be very clear right up at the beginning that this is what I'm writing about. This is the focus of this paper, so your reader knows right from the start, this is the direction this paper is going. So that's why placing this thesis statement at the beginning of the essay is important. And then as stated, number 3, this thesis should be reflected and defended in every paragraph of the paper. So every paragraph should be working towards building and explaining this idea in your thesis statement. With this in mind, a thesis statement is always developing. We often think that you sit down, you come up with a thesis statement, and that's it. You've got your clear thesis statement from the beginning, and then you're going to write your entire paper, and your thesis will never change. Well, the reality is that often when you're researching and reading and start writing, you might realize you need to change your thesis statement slightly. So it's okay to begin by realizing that your thesis statement might change slightly through the writing process, and that's totally fine. Revising, discussing, rethinking your ideas will help you to better shape your thesis statement. So it's okay if at the end of the writing process you realize, my thesis statement has actually changed slightly. Just go back and fix your thesis statement so now that it fits with the argument of your paper. So it's okay to allow your thesis statement to develop as you're writing. This is called the difference between a working versus definitive thesis. A working thesis is your first attempt at an assertion of your position. and never accept this working thesis as your final position. Because as we stated, as you continue to read and write and develop your topic, that thesis will most likely change. So don't fear modifying your thesis as you go. All right, back to the structure of a thesis. As stated, there are really two elements when it comes to developing a thesis. The first element is the element of what are you arguing? So in this essay, I will argue that. So a very, very clear statement right at the beginning that this is what the purpose of this paper is. And as you see, I put in here the term I will argue. Most of academic writing is argumentative writing. You're making a claim or an assertion. So majority of the kind of writing you do in college is going to be argumentative writing. So you're laying out right at the beginning what your argument or assertion is going to be. Generally, you want to avoid first person, I statements, but introduction and conclusion, you can generally use an I statement. The second element then to your thesis is your plan for developing that argument. So here are my main points. I will argue X, and these are the points that I'm going to use to make that argument. So then your reader knows within the first paragraph of your paper that this is the plan moving forward. This is how you're going to develop this idea. Okay, so let me give you an example. This is kind of a simple little example, but it shows these two elements of a thesis statement. So it looks something along these lines. In this essay, I will argue that college libraries should be open 24/7. Many students work best at night. The library is quieter in the late hours, and as a college, we should not limit students from studying. Okay, so we see in this example that there are two elements. First of all, I have my argument. I will argue that the library should be open 24/7. So this paper, that's what I'm exploring. This entire paper is focused on why the library should be open all the time. And I've laid out for you three main points for why I believe that. And those three main points I'm going to develop throughout my paper. I'm going to use evidence to support them and develop them further. But now in my introduction, you know exactly what this paper is about before you've even gotten past the first paragraph. Okay? So that's what it looks like to develop a thesis statement. So keep that in mind this week as you start writing your thesis statement for your final paper for this class. Make sure you have a clear argument and clear main points that you're going to want to use to develop. Now let's take a look at outlining and how the thesis fits into that. So let's begin by talking about why do we outline? Well, there are really four main reasons for outlining. The first is it helps to organize ideas. The second is it helps us to see what information is missing. Third, it gives a clear direction, a blueprint. And fourth, it provides a solid structure to the paper. Now, I think most students don't realize the importance or significance of outlining. Outlining really makes a huge difference in the writing process. It's quite clear which students have outlined and which haven't when they turned in a final paper. And the reason is, like this list lays out, there's a lot of benefits to the outline. It gives structure, organization. It gives you a framework before you even begin writing to know how you're going to develop your paper. So outlining plays a very important role. So let's look at this first idea, that outlining helps to organize ideas and give structure. So you may have a list of ideas that you want to address in your essay. And when you actually put pen to paper and write down these ideas, you can begin to see them laid out and decide how you want to best order them to present this idea. So let's say, for example, that I'm going to write an essay on why fast foods are unhealthy. So why eating out at fast food restaurants is unhealthy for you. So I might begin by just brainstorming, simply writing down off the top of my head ideas that come to mind as to why it's unhealthy to eat fast food. So I might say fast food is high in fat, sodium, and cholesterol. It's often made from unhealthy meats, lacks nutrition, leads to health issues like diabetes and heart disease. So I can just kind of begin by brainstorming and laying out those ideas. Number 2, I can then see which information is missing. When I go back and look through that list, I might realize, oh, I kind of forgot another point that could be really helpful. So by having this kind of visual layout of my potential argument, I can start to see maybe some gaps or see some arguments that might be kind of weak that I want to cut out and think of new ones that are stronger that I can include. So for example, by looking over this previous list, I might realize that I should also argue that fast food restaurants encourage overeating. That maybe that's an important point that I should include in that list as well. So you see how by visualizing it, I can start to think about how I want to structure, what I want to include, and what I want to take out. Number 3, and I think this is a very important point, outlining gives a clear direction or a blueprint. So I use this analogy often with students. Think about the fact that when somebody goes to build a house, a builder is going to build a house, they always have a set of blueprints, right? You would never go into building a house without some concept of how you're going to put that house together. It would be crazy. Nothing would line up. If you didn't have blueprints with measurements and deciding where you're going to put walls and where you're going to lay piping or wiring, you'd have no concept of how it's all going to fit together, right? So you would never build a house without blueprints. Well, think about in that concept for writing. You should never write an essay without an outline. Your outline is your guiding template for how you're going to develop your argument. And yes, as you're writing, you may decide at some points to deviate from your outline. When you actually sit down to write, you might realize you want to take one point in a slightly different direction, and that's fine to do. But overall, you should have a guiding layout for how you want to develop your argument. That enables each element of your outline, each piece to fit together nicely, coherently, and together it's building a structure. Each element of your outline is building one, just like a blueprint is building a house, one complete structure. Each element of your outline is working together to build one structure, one essay, one complete idea. So think about it in that context. You would never build a house without blueprints. Similarly, you should never write an essay without an outline. So outlining is important because it gives us this clear direction. And number 4, it provides a solid structure to the paper. By listing out all of your arguments and evidence, you can decide how best to structure your essay. You'll be able to answer questions like, which is my strongest argument? You generally want to save that strongest argument for last because that's going to be the last argument the reader reads. And so it's going to stay in the mind the freshest. So kind of thinking about how do I want to organize my arguments? Which is my strongest argument? I'm going to save that for last as that kind of final punch to my paper, and I can see how I want to structure that. You can then begin to incorporate your evidence and decide, all right, I want to stick this quote here, I want to put this piece of evidence here, and you can start to visualize how you're going to build that argument and how that evidence is going to fit in. And you can decide how you're going to plan to incorporate this evidence. So not only where do you want it to fall in your argument, but how are you going to describe that evidence? How is the evidence really supporting the point you're making? So it just gives a really good structure to your overall paper. All right, so now that we've gone through the 4 reasons for why outlining is important, let's begin talking about this process. So what does it look like to begin outlining? So like I mentioned earlier, you can begin with a list. Begin by writing down every topic, idea, word you can think of that goes along with your topic. So for example, the example I used earlier on fast foods, I've already kind of created this list, right? I began to think about what words or ideas fit into this topic of fast food. So I have high in fat, sodium, cholesterol, made from unhealthy meats, lacks nutrients, leads to health issues like diabetes and heart disease, and fast food restaurants encourage overeating. So here's my list of all the ideas that I can think of that might help support my topic on why fast food restaurants are unhealthy. You can also do something called clustering. People who are particularly visual tend to like this option because it enables you to kind of use different shapes and bubbles to help visualize how you want to organize your essay. So this is called clustering. So in this little example here, you see you've got pirate in the center, and then you have all these adjectives around describing the pirate: tough, massive, scary, scruffy, greedy, fearless. So you can think about that center circle as either the topic sentence for each paragraph or your thesis statement for the paper as a whole, and then think about each bubble around as describing what's in the center. So if this was fast food restaurants were in the center, we could have around there high in fat, high in cholesterol, unhealthy meat, so on and so forth. So clustering for some people, it can be really helpful. All right, so once we've kind of laid out our ideas, we can begin to develop the outline and put it together into an outline format. So what I've done here is I've begun to develop my first main point. So if you look at Roman numeral 1, we have our introduction, and inside our introduction we have A, which is attract the reader, and B is our thesis statement. We're going to get into introductions later on in this course in more detail, so for now we'll just leave it at that. But see how at least my thesis statement is within my introduction. So it's at the very beginning of the paper. And I have my thesis as, in this essay, I will argue that eating at fast food restaurants is unhealthy. First, it can lead to health issues such as diabetes and heart issues. And second, it encourages overeating. So I've taken my list and I've boiled it down to 2 main points. Health issues such as diabetes and heart issues. And second is to encourage overeating. Now in this outline that I'm going to show you, I've only developed my first point. Just because of room and space. So I've only here developed my first main point. But it's going to look like this. I'm going to begin with my second Roman numeral, and I'm going to write main point 1. And so the first point I'm going to make in this paper is the first point in my thesis statement. Eating at fast food restaurants can lead to diabetes and heart issues. So what's laid out in my thesis statement is now being reflected in the main points of my paper. So under my main point, I have several subpoints. I have 3 subpoints. My first subpoint is that it's high in fat, sodium, and cholesterol. So notice how each A, B, and C are all supporting my main point, my main idea that it can lead to diabetes and heart issues, that it can lead to health issues overall because it's high in fat, sodium, and cholesterol. Then under my subpoint, I have the number 1, and I give my first piece of evidence. And here is a quote. The average hamburger has almost 600 grams of sodium, end quote. And then I have my in-text citation. This is by Smith, page number 52. So see, I've already inserted a quote here. And so I have evidence backing up this claim that's high in fat, sodium, and cholesterol. I have a quote here that's going to support that. Then I have my second subpoint, number B. It lacks nutrients due to poor quality ingredients. And then I have a little summary or paraphrase here from an article titled The Healthy Life. Food is purchased from large manufacturers of synthetic foods. So I've taken this, obviously it's from some kind of article online because it's in quotation marks in my in-text citation. So this is a summary, but it's a piece of evidence that's going to support that claim. And then finally, my third subpoint is that it's made from unhealthy meats. And I have another summary here as evidence. Meat is sourced from large meat lockers where animals are trapped indoors in the dark all day and are unhealthy and often sick. This is from an article titled Meat Industry Today. That's another piece of evidence. So you see how each subpoint is supported by a piece of evidence, and each subpoint is supporting the overall main point, which is supporting the overall thesis statement. So every paragraph, every sentence in this essay is all coming back to supporting my thesis statement. So notice how tight this argument is. And by writing out this outline, I already know where I'm going to stick my evidence. I already have an idea of what evidence I'm going to use to support my subpoints and my main points. So that way when I'm writing my outline, if I make a point and I realize I need to find evidence, then maybe I need to go do more research to figure out what evidence I need to help support that claim. So with regards to the structure of an outline, as we just saw in the last example, you all will be writing an MLA formatted outline, and so MLA has certain rules that need to be followed. First of all, MLA is always in Times New Roman, size 12 font, and it follows this very particular sequence: Roman numeral, alphabetical, numeric. So it always follows that sequence. So each main point should have a subpoint or evidence to support that claim. So if you look in the right-hand column, you see how it's structured, how it's indented. You begin with your Roman numeral, and then you indent to your alphabetical, and then you indent to your numeric. Okay. So now that we have gone over writing a thesis statement and building an outline, now we're going to talk about writing the paragraph. As part of your assignment for this week, in addition to a thesis statement and an outline, you also are going to submit the first paragraph of your paper. Not your introduction, but the first main point. So I want to talk a little bit about what that should look like. Okay, so the structure of a paragraph. A paragraph should really contain these 5 elements. Each paragraph should begin with a topic sentence, followed by an explanation of the topic sentence, introduce and insert evidence, explain your evidence, and insert a concluding sentence. So each paragraph should roughly have this form of development. So to begin with, every paragraph must begin with a topic sentence. This topic sentence explains the purpose and focus of the paragraph. So just like your thesis statement explains the purpose and focus of the paragraph, of the paper as a whole, a topic sentence is like a mini thesis statement. It's doing that just for the paragraph. So every paragraph should begin with a clear topic sentence stating, this is what the purpose of this paragraph is. So for example, let's imagine that I'm writing a paper on why volunteering or serving in the church is very important today. So I might begin by one of my paragraphs talking about what I mean by volunteering. What does that word mean? So I might devote a whole paragraph to really describing that. So I would begin that paragraph by saying something like, in this paragraph, we will explore what it means to volunteer one's time and energy to others. So I'm stating very clearly in the first sentence of the paragraph, this is what I'm going to be talking about in this paragraph. And I'm going to stick to this one idea for the entire paragraph. Number 2, does your topic sentence require further explanation? Sometimes the topic sentence can be slightly vague and it needs to be flushed out a little bit more in a following 1 or 2 sentences. So for example, I might want to talk a little bit more about that word volunteering. We can understand volunteering to mean the act of giving freely of one's time and energy so as to help those around us. This definition is important as it shows that the emphasis of volunteering is on benefiting others and not ourselves. So I've used 2 sentences here to explain in slightly more detail what I mean by that topic sentence. Okay? Next, I then want to introduce and insert my evidence to help support this topic sentence, this argument I'm making in this one paragraph. So integrating my evidence is essential. Otherwise, the paragraph will sound choppy. So I have to make the evidence flow. I've been writing in my own voice as the writer, and now I have to integrate another voice, the evidence, the voice of the evidence, into my paragraph, but I have to integrate it so it flows well. Otherwise, it'll be choppy and not read well. So readers should be able to move from your words to your evidence without feeling any logical or mechanical jolt. The evidence should flow very nicely in that paragraph. So I can use terms like Smith asserts or believes, claims, comments, words along those lines to help integrate that evidence. So let me give you an example. I could say something like, Joe Smith confirms this definition of volunteering when he states that the pure act of giving to others without thought of one's own needs is the essence of what it means to serve. So notice how I use the word confirms here. He's confirming this definition of volunteering when he states that. So this allows me to kind of flow into my evidence. If I left out that first part and just began right away with the quote, it might be kind of choppy. The reader has to think for a second, how is this evidence fitting in with what was just stated? But by kind of setting up for the evidence, it reads very well. However, once I've included my quote, I then have to explain my evidence. And I always say this to my students, never leave the evidence to speak for itself. Always explain why that matters. Why did you include that quote? Why did you include that summary? Always bring it back to your point that you're making. So no matter how good your evidence is, it will not help your argument if your reader does not know why it is important. So imagine holding your reader's hand and needing to explain to them, break it down to them, why this piece of evidence is important. So how does this evidence prove the point you're trying to make? So for example, in this quote by Smith, he refers to the selfless act of service. This coincides with our understanding of volunteering, as to volunteer is to place others more highly than ourselves. So in these 2 sentences, I've kind of summarized what Smith was talking about and then brought it back to my point. So then I've taken it and said, taken what Smith has said and then shown how this fits in with my overall argument for the paragraph. Finally then, after I've integrated and explained my evidence, I'm then going to conclude or wrap up my paragraph. So you want to end your paragraph with a concluding sentence that reasserts how your paragraph contributes to the development of your argument as a whole. So now I want to kind of describe to my reader, so why was this paragraph important? Why did I include this paragraph in this paper? And I'm going to show you then at the end how this paragraph as a whole fits into my overall argument for the paper, how this is supporting my thesis statement. So I could end like this. Therefore, we see that volunteering is a selfless act that benefits others. This definition of volunteering is important to understand as we move forward with exploring why volunteering is vital in the church. So I've used the word therefore to clue the reader into a summary that I'm summarizing now. I'm coming up to my final thought, my concluding thought for this paragraph. And then I've talked about in the second sentence how this by spending one paragraph defining this term volunteering, why that was important. Because it helps us kind of move forward by exploring why this is important in the church, which is the overall goal of the essay. So let's take a look at this paragraph now as a whole. We've gone through each element, so let's see how it fits together now. So this is just one paragraph, probably one of the first paragraphs in this paper. In this paragraph, we will explore what it means to volunteer one's time and energy to others. We can understand volunteering to mean the act of giving freely of one's time and energy so as to help those around us. This definition is important as it shows the emphasis of volunteering is on benefiting others and not ourselves. Joe Smith confirms this definition of volunteering when he states that the pure act of giving to others without thought of one's own needs is the essence of what it means to serve. In this quote by Smith, he refers to this selfless act of service. This coincides with our understanding of volunteering, as to volunteer is to place others more highly than ourselves. Therefore, we see that volunteering is a selfless act that benefits others. This definition of volunteering is important to understand as we move forward with exploring why volunteering is vital in the church. So I know this is a simple, kind of basic example, but hopefully it clearly shows you the different elements that are necessary to building a paragraph. So in this slideshow, we have gone over writing a thesis statement, an outline, and paragraph development. Make sure to apply each of these elements moving forward as you start working on your final paper. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me or call me. Thank you.